for streaming to YouTube. I find you get in the options you get stream to YouTube as like a button that you can click, but then you get stream to custom streaming service, and that's where you can paste in the live stream URL and everything. But if you do that once, then it saves the URL that you've used. So then if you've got like another live stream set up for a future date, it tries to use the old one. It's just saved it and there's no way of you changing that or getting into it. And it's a bit of a problem. But yeah, we're live now on YouTube, and I'm talking to Floyd FP. Do you want to, just for those people who kind of aren't familiar, do you want to briefly introduce yourself, and I'll share you a link as well in the chat.
Yeah, I'm Floyd FP. I'm a YouTuber. I've been part of the Great Debate community for quite a few years. I started out on IRC chat and then went over to Google Plus and the Google Hangouts, and I've done a few YouTube shows and debates and so forth. It's available on my my YouTube channel, Floyd FP. You can reach me on Facebook, YouTube, a Gmail account, floydfp@gmail.com, and also I'm usually on Discord, so you can find me in those places.
So I guess have you got that link in the chat, by the way, that I've just dropped you? There's like a Zoom chat, or I can send it on Facebook as well. That might be easier.
Okay. Yeah, I have it. Let me post it on my Facebook page. So so hopefully we'll get a little bit more people to watch.
Okay. Right. So yeah, I guess I came across some of your, like I was aware of some of your conversations and things when I was still a Christian. And I guess like psychologically, you know, what I did in that time, maybe what I still do now, but maybe the poles have just flipped. But is like, you know, you'd go atheist YouTuber, so you'd automatically kind of put that person in a camp and stuff. And then I guess when I began doubting and stuff, I watched some of your videos, and the ones you've recently put out though on why you're not a Christian, I found really interesting. But I wanted to ask you sort of what your relationship is to Christianity. So like, were you a Christian in the first place, and then you went through some periods of doubt yourself before kind of leaving, or were you always an atheist? How does that work with you?
Yeah, I was raised mainline Presbyterian, which is part of the Reformed tradition, you know, Protestant. The church that I was raised in is kind of more of the liberal branch of Presbyterianism, as opposed to the more conservative Calvinist branch. There are quite a few schisms within Presbyterianism, and my church that I was raised in went the more liberal route, PCUSA. They're called. So so yeah, I was raised Protestant. I was never a strong believer. I always felt that Christianity was something, at a very early age, I thought something was very off about it, that it just didn't make sense. And I guess being raised in a like a somewhat liberal church, I kind of viewed religion as just, I don't know, a cultural phenomena, a way of I don't know, teaching people morality and fairness and kindness and things like that. And it was just very relative and not something to take too literal. But as I grew up, I was exposed to fundamentalists who said, no, this is, you know, these myths are actually real historical events, and they're, you know, they're all true, and all other religions are false and so forth. And everyone else is going to go to hell. and so forth. And from that, it raised all sorts of red flags in my head, all sorts of questions and so forth. And I said, this can't be right. This doesn't make sense at all. Um, um, but then apologists come along and they challenge you. So that means you have to learn more to be able to counter them and so forth. And um, throughout the years, I learned more and more, and here I am today. So it's basically a quick overview of.
Is there a point when you would have, like really classified yourself as a Christian then? Or, like when I get it a lot from Christians, you never really were a Christian. Are you just kind of like, yeah, actually maybe I agree with them when they say that? Maybe not for the same reasons, but
Yeah, I mean, I have no problem accepting that. If I wasn't a true Christian, then so be it. I have no problem with that. Um, I would say, if you ask me, perhaps in my early teens, if I was a Christian, I would probably say yes. Um, but I would say, at that time, I didn't, obviously I was a teenager, I didn't know a whole lot, and I was probably a
mm,
Pascal's wager Christian. Oh, I better believe, 'cause I don't want to go to hell. I'm just going to, I believe in Pascal's wager. I don't really, you know, uh, believe this. I always thought the miracles in the Bible and so forth, I thought they're fairy tales like I do today. Um, and, you learn other mythologies and so forth. Well, how is these myths any different than any other myths? I mean, so I was never a strong believer. Um, I remember in my college years, some friends of mine, they became Christians again. A lot of them were raised, in Christian churches and so forth. A lot of them are Catholics and so forth, but uh, I guess they became born again, and they joined a Church of Christ church, which is somewhat fundamentalist. There's schisms within in that as well. But anyway, um, I would hang out with them, and I would hang out in their church group. And the minister of the Church of Christ church was a young guy, and he could play electric guitar really well. And I was just learning guitar then. Um, and I was really impressed. I mean, he was a really good guitar player. So we started playing guitar together, and I was really interested in religion. I was very skeptical back then. I was exploring different religions, and we did Bible studies together. Um, and I was impressed by his character. Um, and so by that I said, oh, well, let me give Christianity a chance one more time. So I looked into it and so forth. And when we did Bible studies, all the same issues and questions that I had when I was younger all surfaced. This came back, and he really couldn't offer any satisfying answers. Um, and I went to his church, and I said, oh well, maybe if you become a Christian, maybe you actually do become a new born again creature. You take on a new spirit and so forth. And I went to the church there, and uh, people are people. I wasn't really impressed by the other people there. And they're people. They all have the same flaws as I do. They're trying their best. And I think when you are a pastor or a minister, you really have to make an effort to be an upright, moral person. That's part of the job, right? And so I think he really strived, but now I know it was his human effort that made him act
mm,
that way, not that
yeah.
the Holy Spirit, you know, converted him somehow. You know, at least, at
So,
least, at least, at least that's my viewpoint.
so for you, sort of when you decided that you were an atheist as well, was there like a kind of almost like a coming out moment? Because I know culturally in the US, especially if you're raised around it or in certain kind of areas, it can be quite a weird, like you can be in very much a minority, or it can be quite a I can't think of the right word. Like when people hear atheist, they go, "Oh, this person's not got morals," or good old American about, because it's quite different culturally than it is in the UK. I think. Did you experience anything like that? Or?
Yeah, yeah, there is a stigma, especially in America, being labeled or being called or, or identifying yourself as atheist. I think there was some sort of poll which said that atheists are like the most mistrusted group in America. I'm gonna turn on this overhead light to
Yeah,
improve
sure. Don't worry. It's all
my
right. My
hopefully this.
Christian followers watching will love that in the darkness because you're under the power of the evil one.
Yeah,
Or yeah.
well, now I'm in the light. So
Yeah.
um yeah, I started to identify myself as a agnostic, I think, um, in my late teens, because I thought, I think at the time my perception of atheism was that, like, you definitely uh, do not believe any God exists, and it's the fact, and you have, up you have total proof that that's the case. And I kind of learned, well, yeah, you don't need a deductive argument to call yourself an atheist. It's just simply, what you believe. Do I believe that any personal God exists? Well, no. That's enough to call you an
Right.
atheist. Now, you need to have, if you're going to be rational in your belief, you need to offer good reasons. And I think I do have good reasons. Um, and is it possible that some God exists? Well, yeah, it's possible. It would be more of a deistic concept of
Mm.
God, I think. But this God, you know, in my mind, would not be the classical theistic God who's all loving, basically because of the evidential problem of evil. I think that's a very strong argument against the basic concept of a personal God. So so it really boils down to, is a mind required to explain reality? Is a
Mm.
mind required to create a universe, for example? Is it, you have to start with a mind, and and you know I, I don't necessarily think that's necessary. Maybe it is, but it could just, or you could, the universe could just come about from pre-existing, you know matter, or quantum realm, or whatever, and just evolved from that, from the bottom up, rather than starting with an all powerful, all knowing God, and then, working your way down. Um, but I'm I'm very confident that the Abrahamic God does not exist. And that's the God that was, I was exposed to, in my culture and so forth. So I reject the God that I was, introduced, or I was taught, growing up. So.
So you recently just put out a three-part series as well. Why I'm not a Christian, and for people watching, or theist or atheist, it's like you're quite thorough and go, like you made all these slides and you're citing all your sources and stuff. It's not just kind of like my typical low quality effort where I'll just randomly kind of stream and so like you were really kind of thinking through some of your positions on these things. And I wondered if you would want to talk about some of those points that you brought up about why you're not a Christian. And one of the ones I found really interesting was this idea of etiological stories. If you could get into what they are and why you didn't think like this was something that you would layer in as pushing you that needle towards Christianity. These kind of etiological stories fail for you, and that's a lot of what the Bible is about.
Right. Theological means explaining, offering an explanation of why things are the way they are. Why do we die? Where do we come from? Where did the earth come from? Why is there, why do women have painful childbirths and everything? These are stories that explain, that try to explain, the reality that we experience. And Christians like to boast that their religion offers answers to all life's questions. It can tell you what the meaning of life is, where we came from, what happens when we die. It explains everything. And if you look at, and where these stories come from are in the Bible. So we read these stories, and I think, when you look at the details and so forth, you start to realize that, hey, this actually doesn't comport to uh, what we experience in life. Take Genesis 1, for example. Um, it's scholars, critical scholars that accept the origins of the Pentateuch, like the documentary hypothesis. Consider Genesis 1 to be the peace source, priestly source, and explains that Elohim, which is a plural noun, the gods, created the the sky and the dry land from the primordial chaotic waters that pre-existed already. And it has Elohim creating a firmament with the waters above from the waters below, and this created the dry land. And that's the explanation of where why the earth is the way it is. Well, we don't live on a flat earth. There isn't a firmament, solid dome firmament above us. So what good is this story? The story doesn't explain our scientific modern scientific understanding of the cosmos. So that story doesn't work with me. It doesn't offer me, it doesn't explain anything to me. I think we have better scientific explanations, and if we accept these stories, and we say, "Oh well, that's all you need to know. Just God did it." Well, it's keeping us from, it's keeping us from better answers, scientific answers. These aren't satisfactory. And of course, we have the whole Adam and Eve story, which I consider, just a myth, of fable. But I don't think that is compatible with our scientific theory of evolution. Particularly if you subscribe to Pauline theology, which explains that death came in the world because of the sin of Adam. But with evolutionary theory, well, death has existed well before humans ever existed, and there's great suffering, great pain, and so forth existed even before humans and sin came in the world. So again, the whole Adam and Eve story, I think, is a bad explanation. You look at the Tower of Babel story, that explains why there are different languages. Well, I think we have better historical and scientific accounts of how different languages come about. We can actually trace the origins of different languages from other languages. English came from um, you know, like German and so forth.
Are there any sort of versions of Christianity that you're more sympathetic to? Do you think? Like, are there any sort of I know apologists tend to kind of be quite pushy with the worldview, but are there any? Is there anyone out there that you kind of listen to and you think maybe that could work, but it's a bit too ad hoc, or it's a bit too, but you're a bit more sympathetic towards that kind of Christianity or that kind of theism?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of Christianity light sects out there. The Quakers, for example. The Presbyterian church I was raised in was quite liberal. They even had a gay wedding there a year or two back. That's something that would never happened, 20, 30 years ago. And they seem to focus on social justice more, and they don't hold on to the fundamentalist views that a lot of conservatives have, but they still have extravagant metaphysics, which I reject. I mean, all these sects actually believe that Jesus physically rose from the grave, and I simply cannot accept that. If you can try to look at it as metaphorical, that perhaps Jesus spiritually rose, and when he ascended to heaven, well, he ascended into our hearts. I mean, you could make everything metaphorical in that sense, and you can try to you could try to pick out different things that are appealing to you, like Christians are taught to be forgiving, for example, and that could be a valuable lesson. But why do I think those are good lessons? It's because I think they're good, not because God is telling me that they're good. I see the personal value in those things. Well, if I see the personal values in the things, why do I need that religion to tell me so? These are just examples of what I think is good. But I don't need the religion to inform me of that. I think we can practice moral reasoning, without these extravagant metaphysical claims that religion offers.
I suppose you've also kind of thought quite a lot about some of these philosophical issues. Are there any of the like kind of theistic arguments that you'd actually agree with? You'd say that one succeeds or that one. I guess to flip the script a little bit and say what of Christianity would you maybe accept, or the Christian worldview?
Yeah, I mean that's a hard one. I mean, I would say I don't find any of the arguments that convincing. There's all these arguments, for God. The cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the what else? There's Aquinas's 5 ways, which I think are all kind of similar. That always you have to start with some necessary being, and which everything else is contingent on, and so forth. I mean, the only thing I guess that I would think of is perhaps there is a starting necessary being that everything else comes from. But what is that being? Does it have to be a mind? Does that necessary being have to be a mind? There could be a necessary starting point for everything, but again, does it have to be a mind? And again, I don't think whatever it is, if it is a mind, I don't think it's a very loving character. I think it would be very indifferent to its creation. So, but you hear theologians talk about God and the Christian God, particularly like Thomistic versions of God. They almost turn God into like an abstract concept, not a personal being. You'll hear things like, "Oh, well, God is pure actuality, that He has no potential," and so forth. And he doesn't react. He's not contingent on anything, and so forth. Well, it almost turns him into just like a running script, which would be like a very deterministic view of the universe. But if it's following a script, well, it can just follow natural laws, natural rules, and I think you're starting to take away the personhood of God, when you start going into those sort of theological perspectives. He's no longer a person. He's just more of a robotic script that's just just doing one step after another.
Yeah, it seems to me then, like like your position is not it's impossible that a God could exist or anything like that, but maybe there could be some of these features that people would attribute to a God might be out there somewhere and exist. But then to get to like say something like Christianity, and then you see all these contradictions in the theology and the history, the facts and stuff, that's just too much of a problem, and it just looks too man-made. Would that be kind of the right thing to say about your overall what your line of thinking is?
Yeah, it's too much baggage. You can cut it. You can cut all that out with Occam's razor. It doesn't really explain anything. It doesn't offer anything. It's not necessary to make sense of the world and so forth. I know presuppositionalists brag about atheists have to borrow from their worldview to make sense of reality and so forth. And I just disagree. I don't think I don't think their stories make sense of our experience at all. I don't think it is that intelligible. I think when they say that, I think it's more of this appeal to the God of the gaps and argument from ignorance. When they say that.
You've had quite a few conversations as well, haven't you, with some presuppositionalists? And what's your general kind of approach when you come up against that kind of like you've spoke to Darth Dawkins a few times. Have you spoke to Saiten?
I have not. I'm trying to recall if I ever been in a hangout with him. I might have been in a hangout once with him, but we never interacted. But he kind of uses the same approach as Darth Dawkins. Darth Dawkins is probably the most unpleasant person to deal with as far as presuppositionalists. Where Sai over the years has mellowed a little bit. I saw one talk he had just today. It was on oh boy, who was it?
So Your Friendly Neighborhood Atheist. I saw.
He's on Steve McRae's channel.
Okay.
He was, and he did the same script as he did from years ago. I remember I was first exposed to presuppositionalism. Many years ago. I forget when, but it was on IRC, and I went into a Christian apologist channel ready to debate Bible prophecy. I wanted to debate Isaiah 7:14 and things like that, and the person just ran the precept script on me. They said, everything you said there, assumes that you have knowledge about things. How do you justify your knowledge? So boom, we started doing the script today. And when I first heard it, it made me step back and question, but I knew it. I knew from the get-go is this has to be a con. Kind of sound like the ontological argument. When you first hear the ontological argument, you know it doesn't something funny with it, but you can't put your finger on it right away. You say you're just there's kind of defining God as the greatest conceivable being and so forth. So I started digging into it and learning more about philosophy and epistemology and so forth. And I started realizing the tricks that they were doing. And and from that, I debated quite a few presuppositionalists, and I have a 3-part series I did over a course of years on my channel where I break down the presuppositional argument and expose the hypocrisy and double standards that they use when they debate their antithesis.
So in general, what would you say the main kind of script is of like a presupper when you're talking to them?
Well, I mean, typically they'll just bring up a philosophical problem, and they'll invite you to solve it. And they'll pretend, their worldview solves all these philosophical problems. So they'll throw something at you, for example, justify your knowledge, or do you use your reasoning to justify your reasoning? That's what Sai used on Steve McRae's channel yesterday. Or it could be anything. Solve the problem of hard solipsism. How do you know you're not? How do you know that everything that you're experiencing is all in your mind and so forth? If you're a philosophical novice, if you're naive, you're not going to have good answers for these things. And they'll even ask you questions like, what's your theory of truth? It's like, theory of truth? What is true? Which is a very bad answer, But if you never thought about these things, you're not going to have an answer for these things. It's like, I need to study philosophy and know all the different theories of truth, pragmatic, correspondence, coherence. It's like they took a few courses in philosophy and they can fool their friends with it, and that's what they kind of seem to be doing with with their presuppositional attack. But when you throw it back on them, how do they resolve the problem? Well, they just state what their religion says, right? They just offer their metaphysics. Well, we can offer our metaphysics as well. Can they prove their metaphysics? Can they prove their ontology actually corresponds to reality? No, of course they can't without arguing in a circle. Of course they will. But you can just simply call them out on that. But we can offer the same. So when someone like Cy 10 or Darth Dawkins and so forth asks you, how do you justify anything in your worldview? Well, you can just offer your metaphysics. You can offer your ontology, and to say, well, if my worldview is true, if the presuppositions of my world are true, can I have knowledge? Can I have valid reasoning and so forth? And hold them to the fire with that. It's a double standard. Typically they'll just say, justify your presuppositions of your worldview, which you can't, because to justify your presuppositions, you have to use them. And by using them, you'd be arguing a circle. So that's a very lame attempt, because they have the same problem. They can't justify their presuppositions either without arguing in a circle. And so it's funny where these cyclone presuppositionalists, they really don't understand how to properly execute their apologetic, which I find funny. To do presuppositionalism correct, they need to actually offer a true transcendental argument. Well, a transcendental argument, it's not that complicated. It's not about transcendentals like Matt Slick will claim. He doesn't even know what a transcendental argument is. Transcendental argument it's very simple. It's an argument which claims that for something that we all take for granted that exists, it could be the laws of logic, it could be anything, the earth, that there's a mind-independent reality and so forth, that there's a necessary X that's required to have those things. So,
Okay.
So we all accept that Y exists. We all take it for granted, but the transcendental claim is, oh, well, for those things to exist, you must have an X. And of course, for a presuppositionalist, that X is their triune God. But that's what they need to show. They have to show that nothing else can account for those things that we take for granted. That's what they mean by the impossibility of the contrary, that they have to show that all other possibilities cannot account for those things that we take for granted, but they never show that. At best, they'll just say, well, account for that then. Account for it in your worldview. Explain.
Or I found a big problem being that whenever something is offered as a counterexample, they just reject it. They'll just say, well, that's got to be wrong because it isn't God.
Yeah. Or they say, well, how do you know that? How do you know that? Yeah. And then you get into epistemology at that point, and they'll ask you questions like very loaded questions like for anything you claim, you can always ask the question, how do you know your epistemology can lead you to knowledge? So what they're saying is, what method of knowing can you use to know that your method of knowing can lead to knowledge? Well, they're saying, well, what can I use? You use your epistemology to know things. So they're saying, how do you know your epistemology leads to correct epistemology and so forth? So to justify it, of course, you would use your epistemology, which is circular. But
I think there were another couple of points that I read in one of your streams that you must have done a few years ago on Presup, where one of the points that was mentioned was, well, like if you're the presuppositionalist and you're talking to someone, you have to, you need them to trust their own reasoning in order to agree with your conclusions in the first place. And then the other one was that, well, their view would be like an externalist account of epistemology. So you're actually, if they're correct, you're just as justified using the God logic and reasoning as they are, because that's just what there is in the world and what justifies knowledge. And
Right. I mean, if you bring up a problem, like if you bring up a logical contradiction within a worldview, and they say, well, you can't justify logic, so you know,
yeah,
so you can't do that. Well, that doesn't matter. I can borrow. I can grant their worldview. I'm going to borrow. Okay, I'm going to borrow your worldview, and but that doesn't, and show and still show you the contradiction. It doesn't matter what my worldview is. If there's a contradiction within your worldview, you still have the problem. That's what's called an internal critique. That it doesn't matter. A fellow Christian could raise these problems, to them, or their child could raise this problem to them. It's totally irrelevant what my worldview is. So I don't need to justify, reasoning and logic and so forth to critique their worldview. I can accept their presuppositions just for the sake of argument, and then present problems. And you'll hear people like Saitan Bruggencate say, "Oh, I don't do Bible studies with atheists." So what he's saying is, I'm not going to let you do an internal critique of my worldview.
right.
They want they want to totally isolate their own worldview from any scrutiny. And a common tactic is they'll just want to attack your worldview, and then whatever issue you bring up out theirs, they'll just divert it back to yours. So in a limited in a time limited debate, that can be very effective, because they can just simply run out the clock by criticizing your worldview, and you never get a chance to bring up your points and attack your worldview. I mean, you could kill a whole hour arguing about solipsism, for example. The presupposition say, "Oh, prove that you're not in a you're not in a mad scientist vat right now. Prove that. What are you going to do about that? And if you naively think that you can justify you're not in a brain of vat, well, they're just going to pick out the problems with that, because what could you possibly present that's inconsistent to not living in a brain of that? Whatever you experience, that is what the mad scientist could be feeding you into your head, into your brain, and there's no way for you to know the difference, really.
So do you have any kind of strategies, if you are talking to this type of person, for trying to actually have a productive conversation, like rather than getting kind of just bogged down in almost irrelevant minutiae or scripts and things like that? How do you actually go about, like, well, we're going to get something out of this conversation, or the viewer's going to get what's your specific approach when you know that someone is that being aggressive in that way, or not behaving honestly?
Yeah, well, it's really up to whether or not they actually want to have a constructive conversation. Presuppositions are actually taught that they're not trying to convert you or change your mind. They're trying to shut your mouth. So so if that's their goal, if that's your motivation, to shut your mouth,
With the love of Christ.
you're not. You are pretty much wasting your time, because they're not interested in having a honest conversation. Whatever you bring up, they're just going to try to shut your mouth. So so I really don't think people like that are really worth talking to. But if you do, if you are dealing with someone like that, though, what I recommend you do is stick with your worldview. Do exactly what they say. How do they justify their epistemology? How do they justify their use of reasoning, and justify that their senses are reliable and so forth? Well, they appeal to their ontology. Well, in my worldview, there's a God, and he created us in our own image, and he wants us to know things and so forth. So my ontology justifies my epistemology, so I can know things. Well, we can do the same thing. Stick with our ontology. Well, in my worldview, there are natural brute force regularities in the universe, in which natural selection has evolved our brains, which can co-vary with our environment, uh, which produces accurate beliefs within our brains where we can survive. So that is how that's why we have reliable cognitive abilities and senses and so forth. So you know uh, the external reality, which in my godless worldview offers those things which can bring about our senses and cognitive abilities. So stick with with your own ontology. Now, if they say, well, how do you know that? How do you know that's true? How do you know that? How do you know that? And you say, well, wait a minute. If you can appeal to your ontology, why can't I appeal to my ontology? What's with this double standard that you're laying on me? If you're going to appeal to your presuppositions of the worldview, then why can't I do the same in my worldview? So that's my basic angle. Just stick to your guns. They're defending their beliefs by offering their metaphysics, their ontologies. Well, you do the same.
And I was wondering, I guess you've kind of been around to see the rise of impopularity of something like street epistemology. And I was wondering, what do you have like any thoughts on people using that as a method and its effectiveness for sort of engaging in these kinds of online formats with theists and stuff like you do?
Yeah, I think street epistemology is fine. It's just basically the Socratic method, right? It's just asking questions and making people really think about what they believe. So, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And it can be done to the atheist as well. Why, what are the reasons for what you believe? And you might find that you don't have some good reasons for some things. And yeah, you might have to go back and think about it a little bit more, do a little bit more research, maybe read some books and so forth, come up with a better answer. And maybe your view will change on a few things. There's a lot of philosophical issues and so forth that aren't simple. I mean, there's a lot of philosophical problems that philosophers have been debating over centuries and centuries, and to think that that you're going to come up with the answer to them all, and is kind of naive. But of course, Christians believe that. Christians have all the answers. They have everything solved. And I think that appeals to a lot of people because it gives you a sense of certainty. Like everything's black and white. I have everything figured out. I know I know where we came from, and I know what the future is going to be, and everything's laid out black and white. I think that gives people a lot of security.
Do you ever kind of catch yourself almost becoming tribal in that same sense that you see Christians as doing, and like having to pull yourself out of that in order to be more effective at what you do and engaging?
Yeah. I think you always have to catch yourself to do that. I've seen people like always stand when you're watching debate. Well, yeah, I'm on team atheist, and the other person's on team Christian, and I got to root for my team and so forth. I think that's really a disservice, especially when the debater on your side is offering like a fallacious argument or doing a bad job. I think it's instead of overlooking that, I think it's better to say, hey, you made a bad argument there, or you kind of you kind of beg the question there. I wouldn't go in that direction and so forth. And isn't that how we learn? Over my years, I've had people that are more knowledgeable in philosophy than I, and also in other in other topics and so forth, come up to me and say, hey, I think you kind of made a mistake here, first your guard comes up, and you don't want your ego to be bruised and so forth. But it's better just to listen and learn, and you'll become a better person for that. If I make a mistake, I want someone to come and correct me, so I can be a better person, and also learn and grow more, and then next time I'll be better prepared and more knowledgeable and so forth. So yeah, I value when people correct me, you know, rather than rather than I just want to be right all the time. You should try to avoid that mindset.
So someone has asked a question in the chat about whether or not you're a moral realist. As an atheist, what are your thoughts? I don't think that this isn't asked in the spirit of kind of catching you out. You can't, but more sort of what do you actually think morals are, or how do you account for that? What?
Yeah, yeah. I pause when I say that. Um, do I think there is objective morality? It's hard to say. I'm not sure if I'm a moral realist or not.
Right.
There's a lot of studying I can do on ethics and so forth. I probably have a lot more studying to do. My basic view as far as morality is that morality is grounded on uh, uh, the state of affairs, which brings about the well-being of sentient beings, uh, uh,
Mm.
which humans are among them. Now, if you have that as your moral theory, you can then develop moral reasoning and objective moral facts from that. I mean, you can view morality like health. It's a objective fact, for example, that it's not healthy to smoke cigarettes. The tar, the nicotine, and so forth. You'll develop a lot of diseases and so forth. So that's an objective fact. So if you want to be healthier, you ought not to smoke, and perhaps exercising would be better. So it's an objective fact. But I think where subjectivity comes into play is when you pick those moral values. That seems to be subject to who we are, which is an objective fact about reality, and the environment we're in, which is another objective fact about reality. But it seems like what's objective is our scope of concern. I brought up that my moral theory is based on the well-being of sentient beings, right? But to what scope does that go? To all sentient beings? To just humans? To
Yeah.
just myself? To just my family? To just my country? And I think there's, ideally, I'd like to extend it to all life. But I can't tell you how many ants I squashed in my kitchen today.
Yeah.
Because I had to make a decision. Do I want
Yeah.
ants crawling over my food, or do I want the ants to live? Well, I'm choosing myself over the ants. I'm sorry. So I killed around 10 ants today. So yeah, I don't know. Am I a moralist? Am I a moral realist? The honest answer is I'm not sure right now. Maybe someone who knows more about morality can sit me down and explain it to me a little better. But I'm not an authority on moral philosophy. I'm not sure. I know there are atheists that consider themselves moral realists, so I'd like to hear their position. Like Ozymandias Ramses, he claims he's a moral realist, and he tried to explain to me. And I brought up the problem is, what's the difference between humans eating cows and aliens eating us? And I asked him about that. He said, well, he actually said that he has no moral argument for aliens not eating us.
Right.
But we have a moral reason to fight the aliens from eating us, right? It doesn't mean we have to say, oh, well, come eat us, aliens. No, just like if you're hunting a deer and so forth, that deer is going to fight for his life if you try to kill him. But we have to live, right? Unfortunately, we live in a universe where life must kill other life to keep going, to keep living. That's another reason why I'm not a theist, because if I was a god, I wouldn't create a universe like that. I wouldn't create a universe where life has to feed on other life just to survive. Um, so it seems like that to me, that seems very subjective, where you know, uh, or it doesn't seem, because uh, because you have a conflict of aliens eating us and us fighting back the aliens. Well, the question is, what is the objective truth there?
Yeah.
Is it objectively wrong for aliens to eat us? And it seems like to them it's okay, but to us it's not okay. Um, but
Mm.
is that a contradiction? Um, I thought about that, and it, it perhaps it's not a contradiction, because what is A and not A? So A is aliens are eating us. Well, they have a moral argument of why they should eat us. Um, and if we can't offer a moral argument of why they shouldn't eat us, then that's not a contradiction. Um, uh, but we but um, but we also have a moral argument to why we should fight them from eating us, though. Um, so, um, but it seems like there's no objective case right there. It's my side and your side, and Christians often bring up Nazis. You know, uh, what if the Nazis won the war? What happens if the Nazis
Yeah.
got the atomic bomb first, and they nuked London, they nuked Washington D.C., and they won the war? And let's say they even eventually conquered the Japanese, because the Japanese were allies at the time. But since the Japanese, they're not Aryans, they're not the pure, Aryan race, that the Nazis even go and destroy them. And they have their 1,000-year reign of blonde hair and blue-eyed race and so forth. Is that objectively wrong? Um, well, if they're again, if they're thriving and so forth, um, they're just limiting the scope of their well-being to just their race, right? They're not considering anyone outside their race, anyone outside their in-group. So again, we're back to well, what's the difference between that and aliens eating us? It's like, well, they're just their circle of concern is only their own race, and then anything outside their own race, they don't care about. No, it might turn out that living that way causes problems and difficulties and so forth. Uh, within their own environment, and they learn, well, that didn't work out for them, um, and ultimately it didn't work out for them, but that's because we fought back. But again, if they got hold of the A bomb first, there could be situations where they could have won, and they would have been okay. So yeah, so yeah, I said a lot there, but yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think it's a simple
Yeah.
matter. It's
I,
not
I
simple.
think maybe the way most theists tend to think about it is something like well, for most people, maybe bar like psychopaths, something like morality seems very important. Something like most people have some idea of the good. And I've even heard some Christians interestingly argue like even Satan is motivated by doing what appears to him as good, rebelling against God, and everyone's sort of pursuing the good in some sense, maybe by psychopaths. But I wonder first whether you'd agree that most people seem to have this conception of morality, and they want to do certain things because it kind of serves the good. But also, is there some feature of reality that is, or would you want to explain that in terms of like like game theory and evolution or something? Or I don't know how what your thoughts are surrounding that sort of aspect of morality.
Yeah, I think there's an evolutionary account for that sort of thing. You know, we evolved as social species, and we have evolved a sense of empathy and care about each other. And if we didn't evolve those things, I don't think we would have survived. You know, as a species. You know, we're not spiders. You know, we don't live isolated on our own web. You know, we have to get together. We have to live together as a social species. So I think there is an evolutionary account for that, and that's where we develop our sense of empathy and so forth. So. And yeah, Christians will bring up, well, this, you know, the social path doesn't care about that. Well, yeah, that's true, but you know, that's why we lock them up. That's why we, you know, isolate them, because, you know, we recognize that, you know, hey, we all want to get along and have a good, productive life and flourish. And obviously, they're keeping us from doing that. But yeah, again, the sociopath, the psychopath, his circle of concern is limited to himself, right? Um, it doesn't extend beyond that. But you know, those things work out for him as well. Well, if he was all powerful, then it would work out like that. And that's what Christians say their God is, right? I think their God is the ultimate egomaniac. His might makes right. And, you know, and the Christian solution to all these moral issues is that, well, we just have one dictator.
Right.
You know, we can't have all these people deciding what's right and wrong. You know, we just have to have one standard right and wrong. So we have this one dictator, and he's, you know, that settles it. You know, so you uh, you know, but then again, what makes that one dictator right over you know, any other view? You know, that's a question. Why ought we follow this dictator? You know, would we follow this dictator if it meant that he would torture us all? Well, no, I doubt they would. Oh, well, he wouldn't do that. He's a loving God, and so forth. Well, then you have Euthyphro's dilemma. You know, at that point is you know, what makes God good? Is it, you know, is it
Dependent
uh,
on God or independent of God?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You know, is there an external standard to God which makes him good, or is it good because it comes from God?
So I was wondering then as well. Have you thought much about like religion? Like why humans have this propensity to create religions, to create ideas of gods and things. What why you know, do you when someone says, for example, like I believe in the Christian God, do you view that as I mean, I don't want to kind of like lead your answers. I want to hear what you think. But you know, some things that maybe come to my mind might be like maybe psychological projection of the self into the universe or something. Or have you got any kind of theories about what's going on there when people kind of come up with religions and these narratives and things?
Yeah, I think it's uh, our human tendency to find agency in things that, you know, that really aren't sentient and have agency. And also, I think there's kind of like a hierarchy that you know, we have to follow. We have to follow the king. We have to follow a ruler, and of course, God represents the ultimate ruler. You know, the ultimate authority. Um, you know, if you look at like Middle East countries, democracy doesn't work over there, or it has never worked. And you know, in democracy, I think in America doesn't seem to be doing that well. You know, with Trump in office, either. And I think a lot of people don't want to live that way. I think because democracy, you know, it's government. Was what Lincoln say? By the people, for the people. It's the third one. Shoot, I just gave a presentation on this too. I forget. By, for the people, and of the people. Um, but it creates human. You have to participate, right? You have to reason. You have to think about it. It's hard work. You have to think about it. And I think people just want to be told what to do.
Yeah.
In the Middle East, like in Afghanistan, even Iran, Iraq, and so forth, there's all these different groups, and they all have like warlords and so forth, and they all have these small little tribes, and I think that's what they're used to, and they're used to protecting the in group.
Yeah.
Stick with your in group, and you have this leader that is almost elevated to a god.
Yeah.
And you even see that with Jewish kings they're called the Son of God,
Right.
and even like some of the Roman emperors, Caesars, they were elevated to a godlike status as well. So yeah, so I think it's a need to have some some authority figure to tell you what's right and wrong, to see agency when there's not really agency in the world. So that's why I think religions have come about.
So there was a question as well that someone asked earlier, and this is a little bit of a different topic. Someone asked about the Chicago Conference statement, and I think that's regarding biblical inerrancy or something like that.
Yeah, it's the Chicago Statement of Biblical Inerrancy. There's actually 3 statements. One was inerrancy, the other one is hermeneutics, and shoot, I forget what the third one was. Procedure, I think. But anyway, that was a statement formed by a group of basically evangelicals. They met in Chicago, and they created a statement of basically of how they view the Bible and so forth, and they'll claim that it's inerrant and so forth, and how you properly interpret it and stuff like that. And there's a who's who of Christians that signed that statement, from Josh McDowell to Greg Bonson. Quite a few popular apologists have signed off on the Chicago Statement of Biblical Inerrancy. I have presented that in some of my presentations I gave, because it offers you a guide of how they think and so forth.
Okay.
And I'll actually use that when I debate Christians. I hold that. So, do you hold to this standard? Okay, well, in this Article 6, it says this, but you just contradicted that. Now, do you adhere to that or not? The more beliefs you put in writing and so forth,
the easier it is to.
You can now go through and kind of pick out and find issues between this one versus this one and so forth. I noticed the professional philosophers, particularly professors and so forth, they don't say what they believe a whole lot. Like, I don't know if you ever watched Alex Malpass.
Right.
He never actually says what his metaphysical positions are in a lot of things, because I think the reason why is because he knows all the problems with each one of them.
Right.
So he said, well, I'm not going to go this way because I'm aware, because this has problems. If I go the opposite, well, that has problems too. So, I know people get frustrated. If you sit in a philosophy class, some know-it-all student will raise his hand. Well, I believe in this, and the professor will just pick it apart and find all the problems. And the students will get frustrated. It was okay, well, what do you believe? And the philosopher won't say, because he's aware of all the problems. So so they don't overcommit on what their positions are on these things, because they're aware of all the problems. And it's better it's better to stay open-minded and be aware of the problems, and be aware of I guess some of the inconsistencies within your own worldview, than to just be dogmatic and hard-headed of this has got to be the case. If you ask me, like, what was my metaphysical position on, like, for example, universals, for example. Well, this week I consider myself a moderate realist, but I don't know, last month I was probably a nominalist, and then probably when I have the answer for anything, I'll probably bring up Platonism and so forth.
Yeah.
But none of them seem to be totally satisfactory. And you're still learning. I'm still learning,
Yeah.
all these different concepts.
So you seem to be kind of quite fallibilistic in your hopes for our ability to kind of maybe get at truth. Or do you think would you want to identify maybe more as like an agnostic than an atheist then, do you think? Or because there's this whole, there's a sort of more mundane discussion that people often have where obviously the Christian wants to tell the atheist what their position is. No, atheism is you're saying God doesn't exist, and some atheists will say, yeah, exactly, yeah, you're Christian, God doesn't exist, and someone will go, it's no, I don't have a belief in God. Like I'm telling you, I have access to my own mental state. And I guess there's a couple of questions in there, sort of what are your thoughts on that whole debate? And, given some of what you're saying about human knowledge and maybe do you think you maybe fall more in like an agnostic camp, or are you like, no, like I think atheism because I do think there are good reasons to not to be against any of these gods that I've come across.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's certain gods that I'm confident that do not exist. So, I consider myself an atheist towards Abrahamic gods, for example. Right. Some theistic concepts of God. Again, I'm not sure about that. Again, it's back to is a mind required to bring about all contingent existence? And again, I am kind of agnostic about that. Yeah, but the question is, do I think it's necessary? Do I think it's necessary for a mind to exist to bring about that? And right now, my answer is no. So I just kind of label as atheist, but I I I don't have a need to label myself an atheist. If you ask me, does like the Christian God exist? Well, I'll make the positive claim there that no, that God does not exist. And then making that claim, I need to offer good reasons of why I believe that's the case. But if you bring up these other God concepts, well, I'd say, well, your arguments for those things aren't convincing. I'm not going to. I'm not going to therefore say they don't exist. I'll just say, well, you haven't convinced me of that, and I'll just stay, agnostic about those gods. But you haven't convinced me of that. But again, how do I live my life? That's really what it boils down to. How do you live your life? How do you get through life? Do I go through life thinking, oh well, I'm on the planet Earth now, and why is that? Because God created it. Am I using God? Am I using the God concept to explain things to make sense out of the world? No, I'm not. I live as though no God exists. So I think that's probably a better definition of atheism than this, than saying, instead of saying, you deny that gods exist, or I lack the belief in gods, the lacktheist version of atheism and so forth. I think it really comes down to how you live your life. Do you live your life as though a God exists, or you don't live your life as that God exists? One example I bring up, and imagine if you're a theist, you believe in God, you're a Christian, and you're driving your car, you're on the highway, and there's a 55 mile per hour speed limit, but the other cars around you are going 65, 70, 75, 80. So you drive a little faster. You go 60, 65, whatever's comfortable to you. You're going the same route. You're going the same rate as the other cars, which is probably safer than actually being a slowpoke and making all the cars zip around you and so forth. Well, if there's a police officer behind you, Wouldn't you hit on the brakes and get below 55? I would, or if I see a cop car on the side of the road that's that's a speed trap. Yeah, I'm gonna slow. If I see that car, I'm gonna hit the brakes, slow down to 55 because I don't want to get a ticket, right? Well, if you're a theist, isn't your God looking at you the whole time? Isn't he aware of all the sins and that you're committing and so forth? Um, but somehow, uh, you know, Christians and theists and so forth seem to forget that at times and sin. So if there was a police officer, behind my back the whole time, I'd be a whole lot more, ethical than the way I normally act. But if I believe there's a God behind me the whole time, when I act like that the whole time, you know, so you know, uh, so perhaps sometimes Christians forget that they believe in a God, when they do these sort of things. So again, yeah, I live my life as though no God exists.
So I've had one more question come in for the chat, but I also want to kind of be respectful of your time. Like you're not running over into anything right now, are you? You're okay? Yeah.
No.
So the question that has been asked is, what are your thoughts on free will and determinism?
If it was an either or, I would choose determinism. Determinism is simply the claim that all events have an antecedent cause. That there's a antecedent event that brought about new events, and I believe that's the case. Say free from what exactly? Having free will, I don't think really explains anything. I think um, how can we freely choose anything? To do anything, I think one cause has to lead to another cause. Now, there's a position called compatibilism where it says free will is compatible with determinism, but compatibilism is still a form of determinism. So I'm not sure if I'm a compatibilist or not, but I do lead towards determinism.
Okay. And do you think I suppose, do you think that is almost like is that something you commonly see amongst like atheists versus Christians, or is that something that's, you think, a really important question in this debate about religion, or is it just one of these kind of, like, people, the big question is, do I believe in God or not, and then these sort of things kind of fall into someone's worldview secondarily?
Yeah, the issue of free will is I think a bigger issue with Christians, because basically their view is, their theological view is that we are held accountable for our actions and so forth. So if we're not truly free from those things, how can God judge us accordingly? You'll find a lot of Christians who believe in libertarian free will. Now, in Calvinism asserts that all our wills, all our actions were predetermined by God. So it seems to be very deterministic. But the majority of Calvinists are compatibilists. They assert that even though God foreordained everything, that we still have free will and God will hold us accountable. But that seems to be a conflict, if not a contradiction, within Calvinistic theology, and that is a big issue with Calvinism. And they admit it's a big problem. If God foreordains everything, how can we be held responsible? And there's been a lot of debates on that. High Calvinists just bite the bullet. They say, yeah, we're just God's clay that he molds. They're totally deterministic and so forth, but God is who he is, and he can do whatever he wants. God is God. He's the dictator, and that's just the way it is. And when pressed to it, Calvinists will appeal to Romans 9, like, well, who are you to argue against God? can the clay, object to the molder? They ask, why am the way, why am I the way I am? But that's just a cop out. That's not an answer. That's just saying shut up and sit down. That's not really an answer. Yeah. I actually gave a presentation on Calvinism on a Scottish Fiction show, and the Calvinists joined us with that. And I bring up all these problems, but yeah, it's a huge problem where God determines everything, including our free will, including our wills. Yet we still have the free will, and are going to be held accountable for the way we act. So, but bottom line is, I definitely lean towards determinism.
Okay. Yeah, great. Well, thank you for your time. I think I'll wrap up the conversation / more kind of interview around there. And I hope you've felt like, you've had, I've not kind of been weird or misrepresented you or anything like that. In my questioning's not been okay. Have you enjoyed having the opportunity to explain some of your points a bit more?
Oh, no, sure. No, I enjoyed the conversation. I love to talk about that. Yeah, you can ask me anything. I like to be, if it's difficult, that's okay. I like to be challenged. I've debated a lot of presuppositionalists, and so they ask you the toughest questions. So yeah, this was a delight for me.
And you mentioned at the start some places people could reach out to you. Just if people kind of missed that and they're wanting to kind of get in touch with you somehow or see more of these kind of debates and discussions that you've had in the past or got upcoming, how can they do that?
Yeah, you can go to my YouTube channel, Floyd FP. I have a lot of presentations and debates. If you want to see my debates with Darth Dawkins and other presuppositionalists, you can see it on there. I'm on Facebook. You can email me at floydfp@gmail.com. I'm on Discord. So those are probably the best ways to get hold of me. Probably Facebook is probably the easiest. If not, well, email's probably the best way as well. But yeah, YouTube, Facebook, email. Discord. I'm not sure how easy it is to find people on Discord, but I'm on there as well. So.
And I'll put links for those who are interested in the description as well, so you can go and check them out. Well, thank you, Floyd, and I'll end the live stream there.
All right, thanks. Thanks for having me.